Woolly Mammoth Processing 102. After they got the woolly mammoths down to the dock of their settlement, after floating it down the river, they then butchered the mammoth in the river, belly side up. And of course, that was an excellent place to butcher them because it would keep all the predators away. Predators couldn't do anything if they were in the river. And you had the mammoth right there by your processing structures. So you could butcher that mammoth and take it right up, all the parts. And they walked them up. The settlements were always higher than the river. And walked the meat to the smokehouse, walked the fat to fat rendering stations. And I just found a third ivory process chart that I think shows how they did the fat rendering. And I'm going to write another article. In fact, I already have. I'm getting it published. And then most of these settlements in the ravine had their bone bed. And the bigger bones would go in that bone bed. Some of the bones were burnt. And, archaeologists were wondering why there's so much burnt bone in these smokehouses. The reason is that if you put bone on a wood fire, it makes the fire last longer, smoke longer. And when they were smoking, they wanted to keep the smoke going as long as possible. And they didn't want to build new fires every 5 minutes. So that bone was to help slow down the combustion and make the fires last longer. Now, fat rendering is a necessary thing if they had to do. And fat rendering just means you're taking the water out of the fat, just like you're taking the water out of the meat you smoke or fully dry. And these mammoths, and this is why they were so prized by hunters in the Ice Age, they were half fat and half meat. And that is a bunch of fat compared to most ungulates. And there's quite a bit of information on that even the Native Americans, they killed the buffalo for fat more than they did meat. So the mammoth represented a bonanza of meat, fat, and just everything else. They could have made vessels out of various organs. They probably made cord out of their intestines, or else they packed meat in the intestines to store it. There's just so many things you can do. And then the hide itself, that could go over your mammoth bone structure for more insulation. Or it could have been pulled up in one of the ravines and you could form your own house with it. They could have built boats with it. A lot of uses. In fact, the hide is pretty tough. It could have been used to trap or snare the mammoths floating down the river. Now, how do we know they were smokehouses? Well, some of these mammoth bone circles, actually mammoth bone ovals, had 9 hearths going down the middle of them in a line. And these hearths were on a northwest to southeast axis pretty predictably. And that axis maximizes your sunlight. And a lot of the mammoth bone circles, as they call them, had walls that are 1 or 2 meters thick. And that has to be for insulation. And it probably means that they used those structures for dwellings, for smokehouses, for workshops, for gatherings, cooking, storage, literally anything. Now, they could smoke the meat in a simple chum, which is like a teepee, and they had those too. And at Meserich, they probably had external hearths and hearths inside the structures there. But what the Mammoth hunters did is they created a fully vertically integrated production system that took the mammoths from, a wild mammoth to rendered fat and smoked meat and fully dried meat stored in an elevated meat cache. And these ivory process charts, as I say, show this process. The first one I discovered was the Meserich map. I tried to rename it Meserich process chart, because that's really what it is, process chart. And then when I was in peer review for that, I found the Elisevici process chart. And lo and behold, both of them show mammoths in the river. You can tell which direction the river's flowing. They're attached to the bank, and there are loose bones and tusks out that they've butchered. Meserich has the 4 smokehouses shown, and I believe they're depicting both raw and smoked meat above the smokehouses in little packages. But the thing about Meserich is, the Meserich process chart, it's got 4 elevated meat caches that are unmistakable, in my opinion. The Meserich map, now I'm trying to call it Meserich process chart, had a series of shorter structures, and in the article I wrote, I didn't opine what I thought those are, but in my second article, I'm going to opine that they were dog kennels, because I've studied dog domestication a lot more, and I'm pretty sure that they use dogs. And dogs would have been so helpful for hunting, for security, for tracking game on land. And then they could trot down the sides of each river and keep the mammoths in the river. They'd growl, and the older mammoths maybe didn't pay them any mind, but the younger mammoths probably did. And the mama mammoths always stayed with the younger ones. So I think that's how they got them in there. But in any event, I think they worked the riverbanks where it made it tough for the mammoths to pull out of the river. So this fully integrated, vertically integrated production system used just-in-time manufacturing, bulk handling. Everything was ready in a process. So I really do wish you'd read my article. And again, the name of the article is Explaining the Mammoth Economy, Smokehouses, and the Meserich Map. And you can find it on the internet. You just type in my full name and that title, and it'll pop up and you can read it. And you can see pictures of the 2 ivory process charts that I had identified at the time. And I hope one day you'll be able to see the 3rd one that I just identified about 6 weeks ago or 2 months ago. And in that one, it's pretty. It's on the tusk itself. It's not a plaque. It's on the tusk, fairly small tusk. So they had to carve it on all sides of this tusk. So it's kind of tough to decipher what it is, but a famous archaeologist, Yakovleva, drew a drawing of what she saw, probably under a microscope, in that Kiev-Kirilovskaya process chart. And it's got a standing mammoth, a tuskless mammoth, whose the very end of the trunk is tied with a rope, and that rope is tied to 3 stakes in the ground. And what you've got is just basically a symbolic mammoth tied up, below the dock, because that artist, and it was more artistic than the other two, didn't have enough space to do a perspective. But the Kiev-Kirilovskaya ivory process chart shows 2 different structures. And to me, that looks like one's a smokehouse, the other one's a fat rendering house or fat rendering station. So these folks were advanced. And, some old archaeologists had called them scavengers, and they killed all the mammoths in one spot on the river, and that didn't happen. And my deer hunting experience taught me that their ideas just didn't add up. But with river transport, you realize they weren't all killed on one spot, but they were all butchered on one spot. And that's how they got the idea that this pile of bones was, mammoths all killed on one spot. Because none of those bones have a lot of carnivore marks on them. And sometimes they thought it was fast access scavenging. The humans somehow got out there and beat the wolves and the bears and the cats and the ravens and the wolverines and everything, but that didn't happen. So I will put out another video, and I hope you enjoy reading the article and studying about mammoths. It's pretty interesting. Thank you very much.